I often like to look at long-running gaming franchises in release order, playing the oldest title and working my way up to whatever the newest release is. I've been doing this with the Street Fighter and Mega Man series over the course of this year, and it's something I plan to do with other franchises such as Fatal Frame and Tomb Raider in the future. Playing games in this way often leads me to enjoying older game design despite the limitations that existed in the past. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and today I'm revisiting the first game in my second favorite gaming franchise, the original 1992 Mortal Kombat game. Oftentimes, this game is presented as overly simplistic, and as if the only reason it took off back in the day comes down to the gore on display. It's a critique often levied against the Mortal Kombat series, but it's never one I've personally agreed with. The 1992 Mortal Kombat game, which I'm just going to refer to as MK1992 from this point on, has some excellent design and is one of the more fun arcade-era fighting games to play as a result. The combination of character designs, storytelling, established vibe, gameplay, and boss mechanics create an experience unlike many other MK games that would follow in its wake. And while I wouldn't say it's the best MK game ever made, MK 1992 is far better than people make it out to be. If you like the video today, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell. I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday, and you may like my other and future work. Hyping up this video is a great way to ensure others get the chance to see it, and I'd very much appreciate it. With all of that established, let's dive right in. A fighting game, especially a debut one, lives and dies based on its roster. Without a good combination of characters, no fighting game is going to get too far, even if it has a rock-solid fighting framework. Considering every other arcade game on the market at the time, MK 1992 has one of the most unique and interesting rosters from the time period. In addition to common archetypal characters, such as ninjas, criminals, martial arts mastering monks, and special forces operatives, MK 1992 included a literal god, four-armed half-dragon beast, a soul-stealing sorcerer, and an actor with mystical powers. Even the long, pre-established ninja archetype is approached differently, with the way Scorpion and Sub-Zero exhibit attitude and characterization uniquely from how other games approached the implementation of this sort of character. While the palette-swapped nature of them is something that would get memed on by the time Mortal Kombat 3 and its revision started coming out, at the time of MK 1992, the Boone and Tobias team used the color coding of these characters to add to their characterization. Scorpion and Sub-Zero, down to the basis of their chosen color, are set up as antagonistic foils of one another. Sub-Zero is a money-minded cryomancer, whereas Scorpion is a vengeful spirit hell-bent on killing Sub-Zero for recompense. In terms of raw characterization, color coding, elemental affiliation, and the status of their livelihood, these two characters are opposed to one another, and this is a clever way of using hardware limitations to the benefit of creating character-centered conflict. This extends to the way their stunning specials work. Sub-Zero's freeze ball requires him to go where the opponent is, whereas Scorpion's spear brings the opponent right to him. Other things the characters do, such as the way Scorpion yells, "Get over here," when using his spear special, the way Cage's Nutbuster special impacts male combatants, or the way Liu Kang and Raiden exhibit that iconic 90s era sort of MK gibberish, all make the characters stand out, and is the primary reason people stuck around the cabinets back in the day. The blood and gore is a bread and circus that doesn't actually do more than grabbing a gamer's attention. It's the other elements of the characters and overall design of the game that provided it the longevity necessary to live beyond its original intention of just being a quick one-and-done sort of project. Boone and Tobias used many influences from their childhood to form the basis of the characters, such as Kano's eye being taken directly from that one scene in The Terminator, Cage being a direct parallel to Jean-Claude Van Damme, and a holdover from the original vision Boone and Tobias had for the game, Sub-Zero's spine rip fatality being inspired by Predator, character, and Liu Kang being a simple Bruce Lee ripoff, which is something many arcade games did at the time. While the character's raw design definitely sets them apart from their inspirations and everything else that existed in the arcades, what kept people invested in MK was its story, making it one of the only long-running fighters, and quite possibly the first one, to maintain this curious trait within the fighting game genre.
John is a really good storyteller. John has a history in as a comic book artist. So I think that probably contributed to his ability to tell a compact story. The only story we had was a little paragraph that would play underneath the character doing a kata, but that was enough to really intrigue players.
You really gave a shit about it because of the backstory, because about the whole mythology that John Tobias had created. You know, maybe not unlike WWF or something.
The story of MK 1992 is that in the past, Shang Tsung used Goro to defeat the original Kung Lao, taking over the Mortal Kombat tournament in an effort to imbalance Earth's Furies so that his god could invade. In later sequels, some elements of the story would get retconned, such as replacing the unnamed god Shang Tsung is devoted to the Outworld Emperor and Cosmic Conqueror, Shao Kahn. This story framework meshes up mythical and modern ideas, allowing for this weird synthesis of character ideas like sorcerers, gods, soldiers, and other mortals. The contest between mortal man and deity-class reality-bending forces is the basis of Mortal Kombat's story, one that would add layers of mythos and complexity to the overall benefit of the overarching narrative, all the way through the 6th mainline installment, Deception, and some elements of the 7th, Armageddon. There's not many storylines that can continue for such a long time, and this simple starting idea is one of the main reasons why. It is defined enough to get players invested, but undefined enough to ensure that any retconning or expansions to the lore the designers felt like adding wasn't going to retroactively ruin this original story. Really, the only major retcons that foundationally change something from the original game are the backstories for Reptile and Raiden. Reptile gets characterization at last in the second game, which is something he basically had zero of in the first title, while Raiden's character completely changes. In MK 1992, he's a destructive god that only competes in Mortal Kombat because of the direct invitation given him by Shang Tsung himself, and if he wins the tournament, he actually turns it into a competition among the gods, destroying Earth. He's an evil character in the sense that he doesn't care for Earth or its denizens, but the framing of his character's story actually demonstrates the moral complexity just under the surface of Mortal Kombat's story, lore, and character building. Raiden doesn't act with maliciousness in this first game, and is more symbolic of the capricious callousness by which mortal man views natural catastrophe. The way Mortal Kombat is able to establish so much about its characters with 3 simple paragraphs for each, 1 for their backstory and 2 for their endings, is impressive and is something that the Street Fighter II games weren't trying to also do at the time. Capcom clearly wasn't focusing on storytelling or narrative with SF2, which is likely one of the key reasons MK's focus on it really stood out at the time, and still does to this day, the Hourglass arc of 11 and 1 notwithstanding. MK 1992 also develops the idea of an arcade tower having a campaign feel to it. This is something Street Fighter II does pretty well too, with how the boss characters appear after the player finishes their non-boss rounds. When the player first comes across those fights, there's no evidence of such a thing existing, and it adds to the campaign feel of SF2. Mortal Kombat doesn't hide anything about its arcade campaign pathway, however, this adds to the tournament atmosphere of the game. Instead, the campaign feel of Mortal Kombat's arcade tower comes from the way it's split into 3 tiers. In the first tier, the player defeats all playable characters in simple 1v1 fights. In the second, the player has 3 endurance rounds where they need to beat 2 fighters in a row, and in the last tier, they have 2 boss fights back to back. What's incredibly interesting about the last endurance round is that, as the player fights, Goro is heard roaring and stomping around, implying that he's excited and chomping at the bit to fight a worthy opponent. Once the player wins the third endurance round, Goro can't even wait for the player's icon to ascend the arcade tower. Instead, he jumps right in, seamlessly transitioning between this last endurance round and the first fight of the final tier. It's a subtle bit of storytelling that adds to Goro's characterization and the overall feeling of doing a playthrough of MK1992. The only thing that doesn't make a lot of sense about this campaign to me is how Shang Tsung fights the player in Goro's crypt. It would have made more sense for Shang Tsung's characterization for them to fight the player in the throne room, which is likely why later retellings of the first tournament, such as Shaolin Monks or MK9, changed this small detail. With the way MK1992's arcade tower is set up, it creates a cohesive narrative from beginning to end for each character in the cast, making the impact of each character's ending hit just a bit harder. There's got to be some level of challenge for earning these endings to make them feel right, and this game, other than perhaps the Shang Tsung fight, has just the right level of challenge. While the design of MK1992 further facilitates its storytelling, its atmosphere is further established by the vibes it exudes. While it's not a game design principle, nor a storytelling necessity, the vibes of a game matter a ton. Small details that really don't add to story or gameplay are a necessity for the overall memorability of a title. This is one of those areas where Midway MK completely trumps NRS era MK, as the older games leaned heavily into the hamminess that made them feel unique and special. Many of those ambiance elements begin in MK1992 via a combination of the game's level art, graphical style, gibberish, and gore. While the digitized actors of yesteryear don't really hold up as state-of-the-art graphics these days, they do create an iconic feel for the games they were used in, and for the first 3 MK games, they are super important pillars of the game's overall atmosphere. It's almost like kayfabe in professional wrestling. We, the gamers or viewers, know what we're seeing isn't real, but the onus is on the game designers or wrestlers to make us forget, even if only at a surface level. This is what the digitized actors managed to maintain into the modern day with MK1992. It's not real, and the parents and politicians of the past concerned about kids confusing these sprites with reality were out of their minds back then, but it does manage to create some level of kayfabe, which is one of the more undersung aspects of this particular art direction. It meshes well with the martial arts film aesthetic most of the stages espouse, such as the courtyard, throne room, palace gates, and warrior shrine. The more mythical, mystical Mortal Kombat elements come into play with the pit and Goro's lair, which are far more unique to this game and franchise in particular. The way Shang Tsung and the courtyard watchers clap at the end of a round adds to the celebration of combat that Mortal Kombat, lore-wise, is. Gore is often the part of Mortal Kombat that gets the most attention from casual observers or from non-fans, and this makes perfect sense, as it is the feature that catches the passerby's eye. The cavalier way Boone, Tobias, and co. approached gore and violence is part of Mortal Kombat's vibe.
Street Fighter had this feature which I loved and hated at the same time. You can get your opponent dizzy. I loved the fact when I was the aggressor and saw my opponent dizzy, you're almost like salivating at this free hit that you get. And then I hated the idea of being the victim. I put the dizzy feature at the end of the fight. You just get like one last hit, and everybody would do an uppercut as your kind of like payoff. We had a feature that we had dropped in the game where Shang Tsung, when he would defeat you, he would take a sword out and he would like cut your head off. And we weren't going to use it because we were out of space, but we still had the animations of all the characters falling to their knees without a head. One day I just kind of piecemealed the idea of Johnny Cage uppercutting the opponent with this uppercut animation, and then using the animations of the character with his head, cut off.
Johnny Cage wins. Flawless victory fatality.
I showed it to John, I showed it to the rest of the team, and everybody lost their mind, and we have to do this. The fact that we gave the players the ability to actually perform this kind of death blow, this kind of killing move, was really the birth of that idea. Some people were kind of like saying, I don't think we can get away with, letting the player kill the other player. So we showed it to management, and they loved it.
I was surprised that we could include the level of blood spattering around that we did. But of course, when I was working on Mortal Kombat, I had just come from Smash TV and Total Carnage. And so, the levels of blood spattering around the screen wasn't new to me.
From that point on, it was, okay, now we got to think of fatalities for all the characters. Some of the later characters, we actually grabbed animations of them, Kano ripping the heart out, Sonya doing the kiss of death and all that. The spine rip was a suggestion from John Tobias, referencing the movie Predator, and he said, why don't we do what they did in Predator, where you pull the head out?
It's just like, it was just like, oh my God.
And I remember saying, I think that's probably crossing a line. We can't do it. Again, once we mocked it up, put it into the game, there was no turning back. Everybody was just losing their mind.
And if anything, I felt like there was a bit of encouragement coming from other folks, around the office, just because of the excitement that it drew from the players.
Everybody had to see this. No one had ever seen somebody removing someone's spinal cord. It's interesting. It made it so much more emotional. It just like, you're just like, yeah! It's almost like that barbaric, primal emotion, like, yeah!
We never performance captured a fatality for Liu Kang. But there were some animations that we had not used. One of them was this really cool cartwheel kick.
Oh my God. Yeah, let's grab that again, even if we don't use it. Right, that's something. Yeah, we'll use it someplace.
We were both like, wow, we'll find a place for that. When it came time to do Liu Kang's fatality, we just spliced on the uppercut animation at the end of it. And it wasn't disgusting, it wasn't gross, it wasn't shocking.
Liu Kang wins.
And we just kind of reasoned with ourselves to say, well, Liu Kang's the hero, he's a Shaolin monk, he's peaceful, heroes don't kill people, so he just gave him a big uppercut. The process of adding fatalities into the game created so much energy in the whole studio in terms of their excitement for the game that we knew there was no backing out of it at that point.
Liu Kang's fatality does have a unique quirk where if it's done on the pit stage, he will actually kill the opponent by knocking them all the way down into the spikes below. But beyond this, I do like Boone's read of the finisher being mostly non-lethal, at least within the context of what Mortal Kombat characters can survive. The exciting energy caused by designing the game with these fatalities in mind is likely what led to the designers putting themselves in the game as dead bodies and decapitated heads in the spikes below the pits, which has always been one of my favorite subtle art elements in the classic era of MK. They used gore as a gag, as a joke for the player to laugh at, a method of communication between the designer and consumer. This connection between artist and fan is why the designers made the screen shake and opponent erupt in blood upon being uppercutted or hit by Goro. It's an element that adds to the ambiance of MK, and especially within vintage game design, subtle communications such as these were a necessary part of creating a community. id Software would do something similar in Doom 2 with the way Romero's head is hidden inside the Icon of Sin. The best element of Midway MK that essentially doesn't exist anymore is the gibberish though. Raiden and Liu Kang are the most iconic in this area, and I'd count Raiden's gibberish during his Flying Thunder God special as being one of my favorite video game sound effects of all time. It sometimes makes me sad that modern game developers are scared to put these lighthearted elements in their games because it adds so much to the overall flavor and texture of any particular title. Music is also a key part of MK 1992's atmosphere, and the 90s were full of mixing cultural elements. Nobuo Uematsu is famous for pulling from multiple genres of music for his masterpiece compositions, and while MK 1992's stuff is nowhere near on the same level level as Uematsu's work? Let's be real here, very few things are. That man is just a different type of musical cook. The stuff in MK1992 is an intriguing blend of Southeast Asian sounds and 90s era techno backdrops. It creates this sound that's both very mystical and modern, relative to the 90s, at the same time, which is exactly what Mortal Kombat as a game is too. In this way, the construction of the musical compositions mirror the overall vibe MK1992 is going for, and this is also the sign of a successful soundtrack. All of this being said, character design, story, and vibes only get a game so far. Gameplay is always king, and as such, it has to be good. MK1992 is simple in the gameplay department, but while many people may consider and argue that this is a bad thing, I wouldn't say so myself. Complex gameplay frameworks with deep mechanics should exist, but there also needs to be a game in each genre where the reverse is true, where it has a low skill floor and a feasibly attainable skill ceiling. All fighters in this very early 90s period had low skill floors, and the genre as a point of fact always has a high ceiling. It's kind of like RTSs in that way. The simplicity of MK1992 is how every character has a unified move list. Regardless of which character the player chooses, they'll know how to do an uppercut, roundhouse, sweep, etc., which is not true of the game that directly influenced MK1992, Street Fighter II World Warrior. This gives the game a lower skill floor, but because of the way MK1992 has historically been mostly inaccessible and immediately overshadowed by MK2, it's actually difficult to say how deep the game goes. Boone and Tobias and others were never really planning to usurp Street Fighter II's position at the top of the budding fighting game tower though. Instead, they were only trying to make a fun game in the same genre, and until the game ended up being a massive success, there weren't any plans for a sequel to ever be made. This is why none of the endings allude to a future installment, except maybe Kano's with how it references a Battle of the Sands, but even that is a fairly definitive end to the story of MK. This is why the absurdist philosophy the designers took with fatalities and other design elements either inspired or were inspired by their approach to special move creation and curation.
When we were making this game, Street Fighter II was the big rage, and I was a huge admirer of that game. At the same time, I felt like there was a little bit more ceiling room in terms of how outrageous you can get with the moves. We wanted characters using magic, disappearing, teleporting, doing all these kind of unpredictable things. And a lot of the moves were constructed from kind of almost like scraps. Kano's ball was from his flipping animation. Scorpion's teleport was from his jump punch animation.
You know, Scorpion throwing a spear and pulling somebody in, that, you know.
It was something that I remember I thought of that was just an outrageous move that wasn't seen in any other fighting game.
Right, although we used to try to do the wind up and throw was usually like 5 frames maybe. Like if you went like
Yeah, something like that.
It was one of those spur of the moment, inspirational ideas that ended up becoming like very signature, very iconic to Mortal Kombat.
Looking at MK1992 retrospectively, the lack of standardization in regards to special move inputs is another creative aspect of the game's design. Sonya and Kano have some of the more creative inputs, working in block button presses and multiple inputs at the same time for successful special move activations. This is partly why those two characters are so fun to play, and the design of these inputs directly relate to why I like certain characters over others. Playing games is the pressing of buttons, and none of the inputs in this game are overly complex. Special move inputs are a modern point of inspirited discussion and debate among new fighting game fans and old ones. And looking at how the designers in the past approached special move inputs in a way that makes the game more fun to play is interesting. At high level, there are all kinds of things the player can do to link multiple specials together, but even at the humble, casual skill state, it's fun to link a special or two together by hit confirming with a medium kick or sequence of high punches. Fighting games in the past were all centered on short, high-powered combos, which is part of the reason why MK1992's gameplay feels so punchy and fast. One of the oddest elements of MK1992's gameplay is the fact that it's designed on a grid, which means that sometimes jumping in on an opponent is odd because of how the player could end up behind them when they don't intend to. It's something later games in the series would undo, and only requires a little bit of mental reprogramming to adjust to, and creates a singular play experience in this game that no other entry in the franchise replicates. For those of you who have been keeping up with my Street Fighter reviews, you know that I keep a record of how much it would have cost me to play the game back in the day by tracking how many quarters I would have spent. For my recent time with MK1992, I would have spent $14 on Sonya, $13.50 on Kano, $22.50 on Liu Kang, $13.50 on Cage, $10.50 on Raiden, $8.50 on Sub-Zero, and $16.50 on Scorpion. This means that MK1992 would have cost me a grand total of $99 to play back in 1992. This leads me to think that MK1992 is actually one of the easier games for solo play, since Street Fighter II The World Warrior cost me $137.50 of hypothetical dollary dues. It's really only the final boss that cheats in an unreasonable fashion at times, and the AI in general seems to be pretty fair, which is a breath of fresh air in regards to arcade-era fighters. Typically speaking, MK has been pretty good when it comes to boss fights, and this is something they got mostly right from the beginning. The most unique element in MK1992 when it comes to bosses is the way Goro jumps in to fight the player right after the final endurance round. This is unique because it removes a loading screen and is also foreshadowed with the way Goro is roaring and stomping around off screen during this whole endurance round. Goro has 6 moves, and they all do insane damage. He can uppercut with extreme speed, grab and throw the player, to switch the side of the stage they're on, which can be nasty because he sometimes uses it to trap the player in the corner, do the iconic Shokan Stomp, command grab the player to smash their face in, throw a fireball, and do a straight powerful punch. Goro also doesn't respond to moves the same way most characters on the cast do, and this is a feature that shows up in most later MK installments for boss tier combatants. Fighting Goro requires keeping him at a safe distance because he is absolutely lethal up close. Medium kicks and specials push Goro back on the grid of space, which can help with locking him into a jumping kick range. This is sometimes tricky because the grid-based nature of MK1992's stages are sometimes a detriment to this strategy because of how the player can end up behind him, essentially giving Goro a free hit. Depending on which move he uses, he can actually get multiple free hits too, which can be game-ending. Goro often responds to projectiles on reaction with his own, which essentially means he trades damage in his favor because of how hard that hits. With all of this considered, Goro is a fun fight that is challenging enough to match the vibe of the character himself and his status within the lore. Executing jump attacks well before hitting Goro's character model seemed to sometimes confuse the AI too, and I found this led to more free hits as a result. After defeating Goro, the player is up against Shang Tsung. There's some major luck with this fight because of the fact that Shang Tsung input reads way more often than any other fight in the game. He will often use his transformation skill as a spot dodge, which can feel quite unfair at times. But there were a few moments where I was able to use his transforming ability against him, locking him into a free hit or two. Shang Tsung's shapeshifting essentially allows him to counter whatever the player does with the exact correct move, since he can turn into literally any other fighter. Ironically enough, him turning into Goro is the best outcome for the player, since Goro seems the easiest to manipulate in the game. In addition to this oppressive skill, Shang Tsung can shoot anywhere between 2 and 4 skull fireballs, and these do insane damage. They can be ducked easily enough, however, Shang Tsung can transition into the move out of a different shapeshifted special, which can catch the player when they're jumping backwards. He's a tricky fight that takes a few attempts, and this is where most of my metaphorical quarters were spent. There is a third secret boss fight in the game too, Reptile. Reptile moves at double speed, has his AI in uber cheating mode the whole time, and has all of Scorpion and Sub-Zero's moves. Interestingly enough, I found I could somewhat use his super walking speed to bait him into multiple backward jumping kicks, which is how I beat him during my most recent playthroughs of the game. Reptile, as a secret boss, created this secret fight motif that would show up in many Mortal Kombat games, including via Floyd in Mortal Kombat 1. This trio of bosses is a strong triumvirate and would create an expectation that MK games would have cool sub and final bosses, which most games in the franchise have delivered upon. And with that, it's time to close out this review, and on this channel, I do that the same way each and every time by answering the question, will this game make my top 100 for the decade of its release? MK 1992 has been on my top 100 of the 90s ever since the earliest drafts of the list. Because of a lack of access, I've kept it in the blue category because I wanted to replay it a lot before solidifying its placement on the list. As such, it is getting upgraded from the blue category to the red, which means it'll be staying on the list for quite some time indeed. I loved revisiting this game for this video, and it's something I could definitely see myself come back to from time to time. But now, I'd like to turn it back to all of you. What do you think of MK 1992? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're down there, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell. Hyping up this video is the best way to ensure others get the chance to see it. I'll be returning to MK 1992 for a trio of videos in the future, and I plan to go through each mainline game in the franchise, just as I've done here. I am also hard at work on some Street Fighter, Tomb Raider, Fatal Frame, and Super Mario Galaxy videos too, so if any of that piques your interest, stick around. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have a great day, dudes.